The story we're about to tell is a story which encapsulates everything that is wrong with our antisemitism discourse in Australia, everything that is broken in our media, and everything that is, we're sorry to say, corrupt in our politics. It's a story we call Two Synagogues and a Park. Let's start with a basic question. Is the sight of large numbers of people performing salat something that one has a right to be distressed about? As this former Columbia professor felt was so evidently distressing, he simply posted this photo with a caption, "Let the world know." But we're talking about Australia right now. When a group of Muslim Australians performed salat in a public park in Caulfield, many Australians felt this was
provocative, it was deliberate, an act of incitement designed to end in violence.
Was it? What brought them there was the arson at Caulfield's Burgertory restaurant in November 2023.
A story incredible that shows how easy it is to fool the ABC and whip up a mob to hate Israel and Jews.
Burgertory is the largest independent burger chain in Australia. Its owner, Hash Tayyeh, is Palestinian, and until November 2023, he had a branch in Caulfield, a heavily Jewish suburb of Melbourne. For that reason, you might say Burgertory is the closest thing we've ever had in Australia to an Abbas chicken.
Want to try out that Palestinian chicken place?
I've never had chicken like this.
I don't know what the hell they're doing.
Is that Abbas chicken?
Oh, duh.
Unfortunately, after October 7th, Hash Tayyeh started receiving considerable negative attention for his pro-Palestinian advocacy. And his employees in Caulfield reported being subjected to harassment and calls for boycott.
The targeting of a business because it happens to be owned by someone who happens to be Jewish is, in my view, anathema to what Australia represents. It's not who we are.
Yet the targeting of a business whose owner is Palestinian or Lebanese apparently is who we are, or at least seemed to raise no concerns for the Prime Minister. No curiosity about what's going on and why it might be happening. Just after midnight on Friday, November 10, 2023, arsonists set fire to his restaurant in Caulfield. This wasn't just a Molotov cocktail thrown at the door or petrol poured on the pavement. Not that either of those things are acceptable, but this wasn't that. It was a full-blown arson attack that totally destroyed the premises. It was comparable in scale to the arson attack on a Das synagogue, which also was done overnight and led to a total destruction.
Authorities are investigating a suspicious fire which has destroyed a synagogue in Melbourne's southeast.
3 terrorists are wanted for the firebombing of the Ripponlea synagogue.
We begin in Melbourne, where a synagogue has been destroyed in a targeted attack.
But in contrast to the fire at Burgertory, the Adas fire was denounced by the Prime Minister first thing that morning.
The Prime Minister has already released a statement condemning the actions. He said this attack has risked lives and is clearly aimed at creating fear in the community. The people involved must be caught and face the full force of the law.
And was even declared a terrorist attack, despite the obvious and glaring absence of either suspect or motive. It turns out the police would take 8 months to make their first arrest. And just as in the case of the Burgertory fire, as well as in the fire at Melbourne Synagogue, the bomb scare in New South Wales, and several other high-profile anti-Semitic attacks, the Burgertory fire seems to be the work of petty criminals who claim to have been directed and paid by still unidentified overseas actors, none of whom have been arrested. Needless to say, every Australian wants to get to the bottom of these attacks so we can make them stop. In the meantime, many Australians cannot help but notice the glaring difference between the way we talk about different attacks.
While the Prime Minister has authorised a flying squad to fight anti-Semitism.
It was a targeted attack with a political motive.
We are treating this as a terrorist attack.
It's time to get tough. We need a COVID-like response to anti-Semitism.
Peter Dutton met Jewish leaders.
Inflamed language leads to inflamed tension and can lead to violence, so we all need to watch our words.
Our Prime Minister has made our country less safe.
Our world-class agencies will provide all the support necessary to find the perpetrators and ensure they face the full force of the law.
And that's not good enough. Now, obviously a fire at a restaurant is not comparable to a fire at a synagogue. But otherwise, consider how similar these two incidents were. Arson attacks on politically charged targets, In both cases, no suspect announced or arrest made for many months, and in both cases, at the end of the day, shown to be the work of petty criminals paid by mysterious overseas actors who have yet to be identified. Although, at the time of recording, we've been told that the Adas fire is the work of the government of Iran. Which means that of the two arsons, it is the Burgertory arson which is still potentially a domestic hate crime, because we don't know who paid for that. If the arson and accompanying official silence, including media silence, wasn't confronting enough,
Bueller.
Melburnians who were paying attention were also confronted with this offensive message, posted by a local Jewish man on the morning of the 10th, which went viral on social media, but somehow failed to catch the attention of anyone who worked in Australian mainstream media.
Smell of burnt. I'm not sure if it's the cooking or the smell of burnt children in Gaza. This was torched last night because this person organised a protest. Being pro-Palestine. Good. Burn in hell. Burn in hell. It is so crispy. Look how burnt it is. So happy that this is a arson attack because this person organised a pro-Palestine. Anyone who is pro-Palestine is a Nazi and deserves to be attacked.
Do we even need to ask what would have happened had someone made a video like this about a Jewish-owned business that was burned down? It would have been played for months on every news program all around the world. Parliament would have had to schedule an extra session just to accommodate all the speeches. But because the target was Palestinian,
Bueller.
He's sick.
Nothing. Not one word from anyone in any position of authority, in government or media, said a single thing all day on Friday the 10th. Unless you're Palestinian, there's a good chance you've never heard of that video yourself. But it's real and was very impactful to many people on that day. Now, someone who believes in
the fundamental values of the West
might think that one legitimate way to call attention to something one feels is being ignored is to engage in public protest. In fact, we might even go so far as to say that the entire purpose of a right to free speech is to ensure that citizens have non-violent means to call attention to things. And to be honest, we're a bit concerned to learn that many Australians don't believe that even though they are
calling Australia home when they don't have Australia in their heart.
Well, we don't go that far. Suggesting that they don't have Australia in their heart is an unfair assumption to make. But we do believe that anyone who doesn't understand the basic ideas behind the right to free speech, why it's important in a liberal society, why it's especially important for people that powerful people believe have nothing constructive to say, and why it really only exists when it exists for such people. Because nobody ever needed free speech when the establishment agreed with them. We can agree to disagree on a lot of things in a liberal democracy, but that's not one of them if we want to keep being a liberal democracy. It doesn't matter if you're a recent immigrant or your family has been here for generations. That's Western Liberalism 101. So an organization called the Free Palestine Movement called for a protest against anti-Palestinian hate to take place at 795 Glen Huntley Road, Caulfield, which we hope you'll agree is a reasonable place to hold a protest over an arson which occurred at 795 Glen Huntley Road in Caulfield. I think we can all agree that one does not need to know who set fire to Burgertory to be outraged by the act, just as one didn't need to know who set fire to the Adas synagogue to be outraged by that act. By the same token, one doesn't need any more information than the information I've shared with you to recognize that if this is not a situation that merits citizens exercising their constitutional rights to peaceable assembly, we don't know what is. We also don't know what one means when they talk about
the fundamental values of the West
if they don't agree with these basic points. Now, before we continue, Caulfield is a heavily Jewish neighborhood, and North Caulfield is about 50% Jewish by population. The population is also affluent, highly educated, well assimilated, and well connected to institutional Australia. So for Americans, for example, think North Brookline, Massachusetts, or Squirrel Hill, Pennsylvania, rather than, say, a Crown Heights or a Borough Park in Brooklyn. But no disrespect to the people of Caulfield, it is not nearly as large, well-known, or famous as any of those places are.
We all know, any Melburnian knows, that Caulfield is a highly Jewish suburb.
Again, no disrespect to the people of Caulfield, but we're not sure that's true for Australians who aren't Jewish or don't live in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne. In this map, for non-Australians, Caulfield is in yellow in our eastern suburbs, and the green markers are the most heavily Muslim communities in our northern and western suburbs. Some of the eastern suburbs you can see here, the yellow ones being our most heavily Jewish ones, and other well-known suburbs in orange, which also have reasonably sized Jewish communities. We wouldn't be surprised if very few people, perhaps first or second generation Australians who live in the outer suburbs in the north or west, would have any idea what the difference is between Caulfield or Malvern, Glen Waverley or Glen Iris, or even Glengarry and Glen Ross.
Always be closing. Always be closing.
Yes, there are some very successful professionals living in Caulfield. Absolutely. Maximum respect. But on the night of November 10th, the vibe in Caulfield seems to us, if we may be so humble as to say, a bit closer to 1990s South Boston than Brookline, to continue with the U.S. analogy.
Cranberry juice. It's natural diuretic.
Because loudly reminding people who is born here and who isn't,
because here, in this country,
is, how shall we say it, not the sort of thing people who live in Brookline tend to say.
what we generally do in this country.
The other thing you don't expect to see in Brookline, Massachusetts, or Squirrel Hill, Pennsylvania, is large groups of people collectively freaking out over the sight of Muslims gathering in a public park.
Because you drove a Hyundai to get here tonight. I drove an $80,000 BMW.
Have I got your attention now?
Which brings us back to the question that prompted this whole discussion.
I just want to get some clarity from you, NASA. Do you think it's okay to go and protest in Caulfield? I think it's okay to go to Caulfield. It's just part of Australia, though.
Does the fact that they were doing that in a park in Caulfield, which it turns out was across the street from a synagogue, does that change anything? Does that information convey meaning about that scene that we should understand? And if so, do we as Australians all agree on what that meaning is or should be? What does it mean for Palestinians or people from the Middle East to do that? Clearly for Ms. Karvelas, the action conveyed information to her, just like
Forget about it.
Conveys to Donnie Brasco. Information which was not apparent to Mr. Mashney.
Which should be okay, shouldn't it? Shouldn't it be okay, Patricia?
It's clear that for Ms. Karvelas, the presence of protesters in Caulfield was significant. The very fact that they, because of who they are, went to Caulfield conveyed meaning to her that was not apparent to Mr. Mashney. The question we pose again is, do we as Australians all agree? To answer that question, we need honest discussion, which unfortunately is impossible until we have an honest account of the facts, of what happened, what specifically, precisely happened.
Actions of violence against communities in our own country.
And that is exactly what happened. On this very spot, on the eve of the Sabbath, right in front of the synagogue, our house of worship.
Like so much of what Mr. Frydenberg has said on this topic, which we've covered in the course of these videos, that is not exactly what happened. We aren't accusing the man of lying, let's be clear on that. We are not doing that. But let's just say, again, as is common with many of the things we've covered, it's not the whole truth.
These protesters are deliberately going to Jewish areas, intimidating, insulting, and threatening Jewish people in this country.
It was deliberate. In front of a synagogue, there were people there in worship. They had to be evacuated.
They're fellow citizens. It's abhorrent.
Those phrases, violent, mob, thugs, were common across traditional and social media. And the allegation is that they went there intentionally to intimidate and harass Jews. An allegation that was echoed by senior politicians, including Victoria Senator James Patterson and the opposition leader himself.
Very strong statement. The behaviour we saw last night in Caulfield was provocative, it was deliberate, an act of incitement designed to end in violence, and predictably it did.
Melbourne freelance journalist Josh Feldman went even further than that. A mob of Arab and far-left Jew-hating thugs came into the heart of Melbourne's Jewish community and harassed and assaulted Jews outside a synagogue on Shabbat. It's that simple. Why were they there, you might wonder?
They were seeking retribution for the firebombing of a local hamburger shop.
Hang on, there's actually no evidence this store was burned by angry Jews.
Everyone just saw that and thought, oh, of course, it's the Jews.
Aren't they just Isn't this just an outlet to hate on Jews?
This is the entire foundation of Nazism, incidentally.
And it turned out it wasn't the Jews after all.
And as a result, Rabbi Shmuel was forced to interrupt Shabbat service on the anniversary of Kristallnacht, no less. So I think we can all understand why this was so concerning. Now let's do the job that we expect journalists to do in a healthy democracy. Let's be curious and ask some basic questions.
Members of that community were unable to pray at their synagogue on Friday night.
At synagogue, they were asked to leave. They were told they're not safe to continue.
So let's just state the charge clearly in a form you may remember from your middle school journalism class. Who? An angry, violent mob of thugs. What? Assault and intentional intimidation of Jews. Where? Right in front of a synagogue. Why? For retribution for an arson they blamed on the Jews. So what? It halted worship on the eve of the Sabbath. Pretty straightforward. Obviously unacceptable. The question is this story true? Let's start with the first assertion, that they were thugs. No doubt some of the men there acted aggressively, and in one case unacceptably. A construction worker from Keeler who swerved his Hilux in what looked to us like an unacceptable act of road rage almost hit some people. That is unacceptable. But he wasn't Palestinian, and there is no evidence he was involved with Free Palestine Melbourne, who organized the protest. That organization is led by a then PhD student at Monash, now university lecturer, named Azdin Mahmoud Sumak, who doesn't strike us as the kind of person one normally finds leading gangs of thugs into a race riot. And the vast majority of the images we've seen are of people who look like perfectly normal Australian protesters. Protesters who also included a group of Jews who call themselves the Loud Jew Collective, or at least who carry the same banner as the Loud Jew Collective, at least one of whom was actually recognized and embraced by this local person. Totally normal, lefty stuff. Now, before you object, we aren't suggesting that this is all there is to the story, or that these were the only people there, but we hope that at this point, we have already given you enough information to recognize that the story is not quite as simple as Melbourne journalist Josh Feldman told his followers it might be. And if you care about journalism, you already have enough information to know that this story, and the story about the story, should matter to you. So that's the who. What about the what? The alleged assaults, threat, and intentional intimidation of Jews.
There's an obvious aggressor here.
It's not obvious to us. And other than their ethnicity, we don't know what additional information Mr. Kenny is using to make that statement.
It was deliberate, an act of incitement designed to end in violence, and predictably it did.
We're not aware of any statements by organizers talking about getting the Jews, terrorizing Jews, or anything to justify the assertion made by media figures, 2 senators, and the opposition leader that any violence in Caulfield
was deliberate, an act of incitement designed to end in violence.
This was the call. Stand with Burgertory. Stand against anti-Palestinian hate. The context was the arson, video, and official silence we've already discussed. Other than the ethnicity of the protesters, we are unaware of what other information Mr. Dutton, Mr. Kenny, Mr. McPherson, and Senator Patterson had to give them the confidence to make such assertions about fellow Australians. Mr. Dutton says it predictably led to violence.
There's an obvious aggressor here.
Well, one reason for the violence is that the protesters were met by these folks.
Stop! Listen to me! Stop! Just stop.
Now, some people might say,
we all know, any Melburnian knows, that Caulfield is a highly Jewish suburb.
As we've said, we really aren't sure that's true. Why would someone who grew up and lives in the west or the north, possibly a first or second generation Australian, have any idea about the demographic makeup of different eastern suburbs? When was the last time you plugged in an address to your sat-nav, say 795 Glen Huntley Road, and thought to yourself, I wonder if the demographic makeup of this suburb is such that my presence might be a problem. Regardless, we've established the reason for the protesters to be there, and we're unaware of any legal reason for them not to be allowed to be there. Just like the protesters at Bondi on Father's Day, as we discussed in another video, in a liberal society, people exercising their right to free speech and public protest, acting lawfully on public property, are minding their own business. We hope we all agree that 795 Glen Huntley Road is a perfectly reasonable place to protest something that happened.
I'm not sure if it's the cooking or the smell of burnt children in Gaza.
At 795 Glen Huntley Road. Our question is, why were these folks there? Maybe they're local, but Caulfield's a big place. Why were they there, in front of a burned-out restaurant? Were they shopping? Were they
eating a meal? A succulent Chinese meal?
If the protesters were called out by this message, a call to protest anti-Palestinian hate, the counter-protesters appear to have responded to this tweet by the Australian Jewish Association. Tweeted at 2:45 p.m., over 4 hours before the scheduled protest was to begin, warning of, quote, Muslims headed to Caulfield, gathering outside of Jewish businesses and allegedly being arrested. Something we know not to be true, as there was only one reported arrest that evening and it happened after sundown. This tweet had almost 100,000 views at the time it was screenshotted, and to us at least, it suggests a community under threat, including an inflammatory reference to Holocaust survivors, and a call out to local men to come and defend Jewish shops, Jewish people, and Holocaust survivors. Does this context help explain the image you see here? We think it does. Our second question is, did you know this? Is this news to you? Is the existence of the offensive video news to you?
Smell of burnt children in Gaza.
And does all this make you wonder either about the honesty or the competence of the people who told you about violent thugs intentionally intimidating Jews in Caulfield?
This is the entire foundation of Nazism, incidentally.
Aren't they just... Isn't this just an outlet to hate on Jews?
Jewish people were terrified in Caulfield.
On this very spot, on the eve of the Sabbath, right in front of the synagogue.
That synagogue, they were asked to leave. They were told they're not safe to continue.
Our house of worship.
Okay, at this point you're surely asking, what about the synagogue? Whatever happened at the restaurant, whatever the counter-protesters did or didn't do, there is never an excuse to target a place of worship. That should never be acceptable in Australia. Nothing justifies
actions of violence against communities in our own country.
Mobs of protesters attacking a synagogue. But it turns out there was no evidence anyone ever came within 85 meters of the synagogue. This prayer, which we understand was highly emotive to people, took place in the middle of the park, around 85 meters from the synagogue. But most of the action on that evening took place at the end of the park, along Hawthorne Road, which we estimate is about 120 meters from the synagogue. So it's not exactly
on this very spot,
is it? It's more than a football field away from that very spot.
Right in front of the synagogue, our house of worship.
In this diagram, we depict the protesters in red, while the local pro-Israel counter-protesters are depicted in blue, and the police, standing between them on the road, are depicted in black. Note also that at all times, the protesters are facing away from the synagogue, while the counter-protesters are on the wrong side of where you'd expect someone to be if in fact their concern was the safety of
our house of worship.
The synagogue, as we've already noted, is way back here, 120 meters behind the allegedly Jew-hating thugs that Mr. Feldman told his followers about. Contrary to Mr. Feldman's insistence about the simplicity of this narrative, we see no evidence of Jews being harassed or assaulted outside a synagogue in any of the images or video we've seen. Why were they there, you might wonder?
They were seeking retribution for the firebombing of a local hamburger shop.
Hang on, there's actually no evidence this store was burned by angry Jews.
Everyone just saw that and thought, oh, of course, it's the Jews.
Aren't they just... Isn't this just an outlet to hate on Jews?
This is the entire foundation of Nazism, incidentally.
And it turned out it wasn't the Jews after all.
We are not aware of anyone mentioning retribution. There's no reference in this flyer to retribution, and we haven't seen any evidence of anyone speaking of such a thing. We also suspect that neither Mr. Frydenberg nor anyone at Sky has evidence of such a thing, because if they did, we have to imagine they would have included it in the documentary that Mr. Frydenberg made. Just as we cannot find any evidence of anyone suggesting the fire was caused by the Jew, in what is essentially a straw man argument. Here's what Hashtag said, as broadcast by Mr. Bolt himself on his own show.
In the past weeks, as I advocated for peace and an immediate ceasefire and the rights of the Palestinian people, my own establishment, Burgertory in Caulfield, became a target. Staff threatened and harassed, all in an attempt to silence my support. The other day, in a cruel act of arson, our store was reduced to ashes. To those who sought to silence us with hate and violence, I say, you will not succeed.
That does not sound like a call for a pogrom against Caulfield's Jews to us. So unless you take the view that they are all lying, that we somehow know they're lying because, I don't know, because they're Palestinian, at some point we have to accept that the protest was what the protesters say it was. A protest against anti-Palestinian hate, which, as we shall discuss later in this video when we talk about Islamophobia, you certainly don't need to be Jewish to demonstrate in this country, and which I think we can all agree, given the facts that I've just disclosed,
I'm not sure if it's the cooking or the smell of burnt children in Gaza,
was self-evidently relevant in the case of the Burgertory arson. So why were they really there? If it wasn't for retribution, or to hunt Jews, or to intimidate worshippers in a synagogue? That's easy enough to answer for any journalist with a modicum of curiosity. 795 Glen Huntley Road, where the burnt-out restaurant was, is a busy intersection in High Street, where the protesters encountered locals who confronted them with something less than fulsome welcome.
This is my homeland! I was born here!
So that's why they went to the park. At the suggestion of the police, they moved their protest to the nearest open public space, where their presence wouldn't interfere with anyone going about their business. And that happened to be Princess Park, 700 meters down Hawthorne Road. They went there
when hundreds of anti-Israel protesters stormed a park across the road from the local synagogue.
Stormed the park? How exactly does Mr. McPherson think these people arrived at Princess Park?
Hold the line!
This is only half in jest. Because watching Sky's coverage of that protest, it's hard to escape the suspicion that these are the images our friends at the Sunday Showdown have in their heads when they visualize what happened that evening. The reality is, after facing hostile crowds at the planned location of their protest, the protesters went to the nearest park, where they had every reason to expect that their presence would not be disruptive to anyone, as again, it would be on a crowded high street sidewalk, with restaurant tables and people shopping and doing all sorts of things on a beautiful Friday afternoon in Melbourne.
I just think it is so disgusting. It's so sad.
Maybe they were Jew-hating thugs. Maybe they weren't. Maybe some of them were Hamas sympathizers. Maybe not. Maybe some of them hate Australia.
We've got people in our country who hate our country.
We have no idea, and we don't understand how anyone else could. All we know is so far, from their actions alone, it's unclear how anyone could say they did anything wrong, and how Mr. Feldman can be so sure that these people hate Jews. But he lacks no confidence in declaring that to his many followers all around the world.
Members of that community were unable to pray at their synagogue on Friday night.
At synagogue, they were asked to leave. They were told they're not safe to continue.
Which brings us to the final charge against the protesters, which is that even if they meant well, their actions halted people's worship on the eve of the Sabbath. It's a charge made by Rabbi Shmuel Karnowski, echoed by media and politicians, and for which the organizers understandably apologized.
We apologize to the Jewish local community that affected their worship.
Of course they did, as would any Australian if they were told that something they did, whether intentionally or not, affected someone else's worship. What if someone told them that according to the synagogue's spring schedule, Shabbat services at the Central Shul on November 10 commence at 6 p.m. and last about an hour, which means they'd have been scheduled to finish at exactly the moment the protest at Burgertory, almost a kilometer away, was scheduled to start. Now, we aren't saying that a synagogue must clear out after service any more than a church does. So we have no doubt that there would have been people still there at 7:30 when, according to this poster, who writes, kicking off in Caulfield, Prince's Park, 7:30, now pro-Palestine rally now, kicking off along with these folks from the Loud Jew Collective. But 7:30 is 30 minutes after the scheduled end of Shabbat services, and a full hour after Rabbi Karnowski says he ordered the evacuation of the synagogue, at least according to reporting in The Australian, which quotes him as saying it was halfway through the service. So, halfway through spring services would be around 6:30 p.m., 30 minutes before the start of the Burgertory protest and 60 minutes before its relocation to Prince's Park. Probably 7 minutes before this allegedly intimidatory prayer took place, 80 meters from the synagogue itself. So that begs the question, if that all happened after 6:30, then what happened before 6:30 to cause the rabbi to halt Shabbat service? We can't know, and to our knowledge, no journalist has ever asked, and we aren't journalists. But according to the rabbi himself, it was the fact that a large group of Muslims and Arab protesters were coming to Caulfield with, quote, intimidation, incitement, blatant Jew hatred, and violence. Now, what could possibly have given the rabbi the idea at 6:30 p.m., 30 minutes before the scheduled protest at Burgertory and 60 minutes before things got started at Prince's Park, that these people came to Caulfield with intimidation, incitement, blatant Jew hatred, and violence in mind? We can't know, but is it possible it's because the AJA told them so at 2:47 p.m.? Is it possible that the angst created by this tweet, the confrontations at Burgertory that then followed a gathering of angry Caulfield residents at the restaurant, even before the protest, created a climate of swirling allegations and rumpus that would have reached members of the synagogue and triggered a panic that had no basis in reality? Now, I don't want to be unfair to Rabbi Shmuel, who ultimately is responsible for the safety of his community. If my mom were sitting in church and started nervously texting me because she heard that mobs were coming to town hunting Greeks, at a time when everyone knows
we've got people in our country who hate our country,
the first thing I'd try to do is calm her down. I'd say, Mama, don't believe everything you hear on cable news.
Noisy and aggressive,
despicable,
cultural Marxists,
pro-Hamas jihadists, turning their back on civilization.
Remember, there are people who want you to be afraid of your fellow
poorly integrated migrants,
flirting with ideas of barbarism.
Shit Jews.
They're on the side of the rapists and the torturers and the killers and the kidnappers.
They're cultivating your fear because your fear serves their ambitions.
A whole bunch of lowlives who need to get jobs. It's a reality.
That's what I'd tried to do. But eventually, if the text kept coming, if the fear didn't stop, I'd sooner or later say, okay, Mama, maybe you should just go home as a precaution. Better safe than sorry. That's what I'd do, and I don't blame Rabbi Shmuel for doing anything different. But the next day, when the smoke had cleared, when everyone was waking up to a new day, I think I would put a bit more effort than many Australians put in to make sure I understood all the facts of what had happened.
At synagogue, they were asked to leave. They were told they're not safe to continue.
And that responsibility would be exponentially higher if I were a journalist working for the public broadcaster, speaking 72 hours after the fact. Because it turns out that anybody who bothered to ask would have learned that
Tasnim organised the rally in the heart of Melbourne's Jewish diaspora, says they didn't know the synagogue was nearby.
And how could they? How could she or anyone know there was a synagogue there? This is what the synagogue would have looked like from the vantage point of Hawthorne Road during daylight. Even in the odd chance that someone had wandered over to the synagogue, they would have seen a nondescript modern building with no Jewish identifiers and no sign indicating what it was other than a sign that says Community Center. What percent of non-Jewish residents of Caulfield do you think know what this building is? I'm asking specifically about people who live in Caulfield. What reason would a non-Jewish resident have to know that, unless they had a friend who belonged to the congregation? Now, why would anyone expect that someone who might have driven to Caulfield from, say, Broadmeadows, a heavily Muslim community in the northern suburbs, that's over an hour away depending on the traffic, why would anyone think that such a person would have the foggiest idea that this building is a synagogue?
I just want to get some clarity from you, NASA. Do you think it's okay to go and protest in Caulfield? I think it's okay to go to Caulfield. It's just part of Australia, though.
Well, it should be okay, shouldn't it? Shouldn't it be okay, Patricia?
There's an obvious aggressor here.
In Caulfield, and you think that's okay?
I grew up in the United States, where white women have been asking questions like that for over 120 years after Reconstruction. But now we consider it socially unacceptable, especially on live TV. And before you start sending us angry messages, we are not accusing Ms. Carvelis, or anyone for that matter, of racism, at least in the way you may be thinking about the term. We are not doing that. We don't think that anyone in Caulfield has a racial or ethnic animus towards the protesters. We are quite certain that if any of them encountered a person in a hijab at work or in a shop, they'd be perfectly comfortable and polite. For those reasons, we imagine they imagine themselves to be tolerant, non-racist people. But everyone in this story, from rabbis to journalists to politicians and others, all seem to have accepted a superficial narrative about the protesters that, I think we've shown, doesn't hold up to the least bit of scrutiny and curiosity. They accepted a story about Arabs and Muslims that we don't believe they would have accepted without a lot more evidence if it had been about any other group. We believe that if Patricia Carvelis had been told by a panicked friend that a busload of Koori kids from Shepperton, perhaps on a field trip or some high school exchange, had, quote, stormed the Caulfield Aquatic Center, to borrow James McPherson's colorful phrase, and as a result,
things turned ugly, surprise, surprise.
There were riots directed at the Jewish community.
If they were told they're not safe to continue.
We're fairly certain her journalistic instinct would incline her to ask for a bit more detail about exactly what happened, exactly what these kids did, before she simply unreported that incredibly charged, racially charged allegation to millions of Australians. But she didn't do that. In fact, nobody did that. That too is racism. It doesn't just come wearing a hood or carrying a burning cross.
There's an obvious aggressor here.
Accepting narratives about people, like who is or isn't the aggressor in a fistfight, when it's clear the only information you have is their ethnicity, we're sorry to say, no matter how nice you may be one-on-one as a person, and how tolerant and open-minded you think you might be,
obviously we welcome the huge Muslim communities we've had in Australia.
We do not doubt Mr. Kennedy's sincerity in saying that.
They're a growing part of our community, and we all have a lot of Muslim friends in this country, regular guests on our program.
But a friend is not just someone you're polite with or get on with. It's someone whose life and perspectives and point of view is of interest to you. It's someone whose story and world makes you curious.
But having said that, we have whipped ourselves over Islamophobia since 9/11.
Curious to understand why, for example, Muslim Australians still feel like Islamophobia is a problem.
Since October the 7th, a 10-fold increase in Islamophobic incidents.
Even though men like Mr. Kenny believe that just because they don't see it, it can't possibly exist. We discuss all that in our segment on Islamophobia. It manifests itself every day in the very fact that we are all prepared to accept stories about people for no other reason than that they confirm our pre-existing narratives about them. And when that story turns out to be wrong, then the unconscious racial bias can be exposed in the most embarrassing ways, as the former Treasurer of Australia, current Chairman of Goldman Sachs, and potential future Prime Minister of our country shall demonstrate.
Police struggled to maintain order. Local Jewish residents were denied access to their own homes.
That's where we leave. That's our home. That's our home. Where do you want to go? That's my house.
Now, come on, let's think about this for a moment. It's a small country. We all know what the suburbs are like. There is no possible way that gentleman was denied access to his home. He was prevented from crossing Hawthorne Street at the edge of Princess Park. So why did the policeman do that?
Safe for them to leave. Well, you guys can get.
Yes, because it was not safe for them, i.e. the protesters. Because the police clearly found the pro-Israel counter-protesters to be exactly what they look like in these videos. exactly like the kind of people who show up ready to rumble after getting a message like this.
Surprise, surprise.
Angry locals who seem to have nothing better to do on a balmy November night, the Sabbath no less, than to stand on a sidewalk across the road from a park where there is no reason for anyone to be and shout allegedly racist epithets at people engaging in a lawful act in a public park.
Were riots directed at the Jewish community.
There's an obvious aggressor here.
That's not clear to us at all. Zooming back to the edge of Prince's Park for a moment, the protest and counter-protest took place along Hawthorne Road, also called State Road 8. We've told you why the protesters here in red were there. They're in a public park, engaged in a lawful act of protest. You may not like it. You may not like them, their clothes, their flag, whatever. In a liberal democracy like Australia, that's none of your business. It's also none of the business of whoever may or may not have been in the unmarked building, which we all now know was a synagogue way back there. It was none of their business either, especially since by this time, around 9 p.m. and well past sundown on the Sabbath, we'd imagine Hasidic Jews would all be well at home by now. Take a look at the east side of State Road 8. It's a sidewalk with walls for 4 homes. There's nothing else there. No shops, no restaurants, nothing. Drive down that road any night after dark, and you'll almost surely see nobody there. So if the protesters were protesting, what were the counter-protesters doing?
Were riots directed at the Jewish community.
There's an obvious aggressor here.
They aren't there keeping the Sabbath. They aren't socializing. They aren't enjoying drinks with mates. None of these people are there minding their own business. They are there to confront the protesters.
Jewish Australians have a right to feel safe and to be safe in their own country. No ifs, no buts.
Of course they do. But don't Muslim Australians or Palestinian Australians, even if they are protesting in a way or place that someone else doesn't like?
Unacceptable that last night this was the experience of Melbourne's Jewish community.
But by Jewish Australians, the Premier clearly does not mean her, or them, or them.
Why don't they count as Jewish?
And if it's not for them, then we dare say, maybe it's not for you either, regardless of your religion. Despite everything that happened that evening, the shouting, the passions, the tension, the rage. Despite reports of copious racial slurs hurled at protesters, the assertions that they don't belong in Australia, there was only one incident that merited an arrest. A Palestinian man who was allegedly hit by a beverage container thrown from the pro-Israel side of the street, turned around and charged the pro-Israel crowd, was tackled by police, and as he was dragged away, shouted, "Free Palestine." That's it, folks. That's the Great Caulfield Race Riot of 2023. What the Australian still calls a violent riot.
Jewish people were terrified in Caulfield.
Who can blame them? If I were minding my own business on the night of Friday, November 10, and woke up the next morning to reports of an attempted pogrom in Caulfield, of mobs attacking a synagogue, hunting people of my ethnicity down, I too would be terrified.
It cannot happen that Jews in their own country they chose to live in are fearful.
We agree with Ms. Gall that Jews, in fact no Australian, should be fearful in their community. And we completely understand why Jewish people would be terrified. The question is, who is it that terrified them? Was it this woman?
It's important to not nullify the grief or the pain that any community is experiencing.
Tamsin Mahmood, a PhD student at Monash and organizers of the protest, who terrified them? Who told them something about what happened that night that I think everyone can decide for themselves may not have been entirely true. If our goal is to protect Jewish Melburnians from unnecessary distress, why would anyone do that? Knowing what we know about how narratives like these undermine cohesion, breed division, and poison the discourse on racism, Islamophobia, and antisemitism.
The discourse of anti-Semitism has been completely perverted by the need to find a way of delegitimizing and censoring people who are critical of Israel or even critical of Zionism because you don't have good arguments.
As I went down in the river to pray, studying.
That's Peter Beinart, professor, journalist, scholar, and critic of modern Judaism and Zionism. He's a highly influential and polarizing figure inside the Jewish American community, making a critique of anti-Semitism discourse which turns out to have been validated by his ideological opposite.
Our job is not to make you look good, American Jews. Your job is to make us look good.
Harvard emeritus professor Ruth Weiss, who is equally polarizing and influential. She's not only emeritus professor at Harvard, where she held an endowed chair, she is also a National Humanities Medalist, an honor which puts her in the company of the most important pillars of American culture and society. There's only one such medal awarded every year. Even in Australia, a search on her name in the ABC's website garnered 88 hits.
Don't let the war of words ever be fought about Israel's nature. Let it be fought about why you can't accept Israel.
The Anti-Defamation League knows that if it's trying to defend the military court system in the West Bank, they've already lost.
What's worse, there are those who contend that the kind of motivated reasoning and instrumentalized rhetoric advocated by people like Professor Weiss is an invitation to, if not a slippery slope toward, mendacity.
They don't care about whether it's true or not.
That's political scientist and Professor Norman Finkelstein, who, as you probably guess, is also highly influential and highly polarizing, inside and outside the Jewish community, in America and around the world.
Because if it serves the cause, it's true.
And to be clear, nothing that Professor Weiss says in the video we share, nor in anything we know she has ever said or written, is an encouragement to mendacity.
Any discussion of what life is actually like for Palestinians on the ground, you've already lost the conversation.
Turn the subject to the accusers, not to the accused.
So the move is always to basically turn attention away from what's actually happening to Palestinians on the ground and turn it into a question about the motivations of the person who is making the criticism.
Teach them how to defend by attacking.
Mr. Finkelstein's contention, however, is that the ideological fervor, which is so obvious in clips like these, leads many people to that.
I know that mentality.
You have to know that that's the goal. You have to expose these people. You cannot allow them into a big tent.
If it serves the cause, even if it's not true, it's true.
Well, first of all, Professor, thank you for these words of wisdom, which 30 years ago would sound mainstream, but nowadays it's a bravery to say them.
And before you let anyone gaslight you into thinking that even talking about this is somehow an anti-Semitic, what's the word?
Trope, they call it. I hate that word. It's just a stupid word.
Yes, that's it. It's not a trope, because it has nothing to do with Semitism, or Zionism, or Israel. It's just propaganda. It's how propaganda works. We as citizens just need to do a better job of spotting it. Because it does work. Let's not kid ourselves. There's a reason it's done. According to The Australian, local businessman Menachem Vorkheimer took Ms. Samak and FPM to the Human Rights Council of all places, and with this, as well as the media vilification, they apologized and promised to never do it again.
We apologise to the Jewish local community that affected their worship.
Yes, Ms. Mahmoud Samak ended up apologizing for the protest. But while Mr. Vorkheimer may not realize it, this is the most Pyrrhic of Pyrrhic victories. Because the right of public protest actually makes us all safe, including the people being protested, as annoying as that may be for them. That's the thing. It makes the people of Caulfield safe. If you are listening to this and still unsure why, then we definitely encourage you to watch to the end of this video series when we cover that topic. Because, as we've said, it's Western Liberalism 101. For now, let's just say that Tasnim Samak apologized, along with the leadership of Free Palestine Melbourne, just as Jenny Leong apologized for any offense or hurt her comments caused.
Did it help them?
No, it didn't help.
I think they can have an anti-racism vigil.
It wasn't an anti-racism vigil.
They apologised.
This is a euphemistic way to describe what was something quite shocking.
But by now, I think you get where this is going.
They went along to pray, to chant some anti-racism chants.
In Caulfield, and you think that's okay? Saying it's okay to go to Caulfield, it's just part of Australia, though.
You can't appease them because the issue is not anti-Semitism. The issue is Israel and the class war.
Whether or not you agree with Mr. Finkelstein is irrelevant. we think the next generation is not going to be playing by those same rules. Obviously, we cannot know whether or to what degree the statements expressed by Professors Weiss, Beinert, Finkelstein, or anyone else characterize the motivations of any individual Australian. Whether we're talking about Mr. Frydenberg, Mr. Feldman, Mr. Rivkin, or anyone else. We're not here to impugn the integrity of any person, especially a person we don't know. But we sure cannot help but notice a pattern. And it's a pattern that seems to us to be both explanatory and predictive. Which brings us back to the reason for this entire discussion.
I just want to get some clarity from you, NASA. Do you think it's okay to go and protest in Caulfield?
Well, it should be okay, shouldn't it? Shouldn't it be okay, Patricia?
That we have so much to talk about. And all we can say is this. We are not going to make progress in this country on cohesion until we break that pattern. And we are certain we shall have to, one way or another, because we've seen this movie before.
There are people who are going to be offended by our mere presence here.
Banging on the chick 'cause I'm a gangster, bitch. I'm gang banging on the strip on some gangster shit.
In 1989, African Americans shattered a set of norms and taboos when they marched right into the all-white Italian neighborhood of Bensonhurst, which, whatever the reason for the march, was seen as insulting and threatening to the community, especially given that they marched for 7 straight days, carried bullhorns, and were frankly far more intimidating than the folks who showed up at Prince's Park in Caulfield.
They don't belong here and we don't belong in them.
Jewish families now shaken in an area they saw as their sanctuary.
Do you think this is going to help? Is this going to help? Or is it going to stir more?
This is instigation, it's not demonstration.
The tense scenes began early up the road before the demonstration settled on Prince's Park.
Go home! Go home! Go home! Go home! Go home!
Enough is enough! It's enough!
The protests have gotten out of hand.
This is what he wants, though. Free meeting. That's all he understands. This is what he wants. He's bringing more hatred than anything.
You loser!
Whites brought their own accusations to the streets.
Central Park! What are you doing, Central Park?
Started off with one guy yelling, "What about Central Park?"
What are you doing, Central Park?
No. Give us back the hostages then.
You killed them?
And a young woman, I remember next to him saying, "Yeah, shit, it goes both ways."
I never thought in my lifetime that I would see such an explosion of pure hatred, Jewish animosity, and such violence.
There was a tug of war about who was the victim, who was the biggest victim, and who was the aggressor.
Initially, the instinct of New York's political establishment was to defend this besieged white community, just as the instinct of our own political class, from the PM to ministers to the premiers, naturally aligned with a point of view of people with whom they identified and whom they personally knew.
Unacceptable that last night this was the experience of Melbourne's Jewish community.
The second thing that I urge is that people not engage in marches into communities.
Just like they always had done in the past when this sort of thing happened.
And we feel that we have to do it this way so that this community will be forced to deal with it.
But this time, things would turn out differently for the whole country.
If Koch thought his defense of Bensonhurst would win white support, he was mistaken. Larger New York was quick to dissociate itself. Those who lived in Bensonhurst could feel they had become bit players in a much larger drama.
Because times had changed. Sound familiar? Just like the shell-shocked premiere of New South Wales after the Sydney Harbour Bridge March.
Firstly, it was a massive crowd, over 100,000 people. And if the weather wasn't appalling, I think it would have even been maybe even double the size.
Ed Koch found that public sympathy, including white public sympathy, was with the protesters, not with the angry people of Bensonhurst, whose sanctuary had been invaded. In fact, many people believe that his failure to recognize the way the zeitgeist had shifted in that moment is what ended his storied political career, which the people of Bensonhurst had to learn to live with, whether they liked it or not. Their Italian sanctuary was gone.
Jewish people were terrified in Caulfield.
Is that what's going to happen to the idea of Jewish North Caulfield, which women like Ms. Carvella seem to hope remains pristine, unsullied by the distasteful presence of Australians from the kind of communities who don't realize how presumptuous it is to imagine that freedom of speech applies to everyone and everywhere in Australia?
We are
affirming today that New York City is not going to become Johannesburg, South Africa. Amen, Reverend.
Or he might have said Hebron. This is not the first time people in different ethnic groups and tribes argue about who gets to go where in our supposedly free and multicultural societies. And they all seem to end the same way, with the dissolution of once sacrosanct boundaries and taboos.
May the Christian Lord guide my hand against your Roman popery!
Now that, my friends, is a violent riot. What happened in Caulfield was no violent riot. At its worst, at this moment, which is the one you've certainly seen played on your screens many times if you live in Australia, when someone got hit by a beverage container, it was a little bit more than a bar fight.
I never thought in my lifetime that I would see such violence.
But let's keep it real, okay?
Again, not to be pedantic, but most people saying that didn't see anything that night because, again, they weren't there. If they were, they know that there's more violence at many A-League matches. Let's be frank. This wasn't a race war. It was Nerd Bensonhurst. Probably the most exciting thing that's ever happened in some of these people's lives, which is the part of this story that is almost high comedy. Because here's the AJA calling people out to a rumble, but it's Caulfield.
M&O gangsters. There is some serious shit going down.
Who are you, Fanny Craddock? What are you do with that? You gonna bake me a cake? You sing me a song, watch me blow out me fucking candles?
We're not trying to be disrespectful. We're just pointing out the self-evident fact that when you have a protest organized by a diminutive female PhD student on one side and the Caulfield East Side gangsta posse that came out to confront them on November 10.
East Side!
We can save the country. That is why I was calling on all of you. Unite into one massive
children of professionals living in multi-million-dollar homes on the other, you are not going to get a violent riot.
With some proper men, like Colonel Custer and Geronimo. Have you ever heard of them? No. Because you were too busy in your penny baking fucking fairy cakes, weren't you?
It's not about race or religion. The Cray twins, for example, were Jewish men, but they were Jewish East Enders.
Like a Western.
They weren't lawyers and accountants living in Hampstead or St. John's Wood.
Increase. Fucking embarrassing. Waste of our time. Fucking waste of our time.
So we think Australians would have been better served if journalists had simply brought some healthy scrutiny and perspective to the panic reports of pogroms, Kristallnacht, and assaults on a synagogue from, again, not to sound like a broken record, people who were not there.
Just genuinely disappointed with it, that's all. Look at that. Full of iron, that is.
Back to Prince's Park in Caulfield. The fact that Jewish people who happen to be on the wrong sides of this issue are also easily dismissed is not an indictment of Israel, of Zionism, or of pro-Israel Australians and organizations. It's an indictment on the health of our democracy. Because as we've said before, if one's concern for Jewish safety stops at friends and the people they care about, it's not concern for Jewish safety. It's just self-interest.
The way that we talk about anti-Semitism isn't about protecting Jews, it's about protecting Israel. How dangerous is that?
The only Jewish safety that's important is Zionist Jewish safety. So if you're an anti-Zionist Jew, you can get thrown to the ground. That literally happened to a professor in her 50s or 60s, I believe at the University of Vermont, who was I think in the Department of Jewish Studies.
Unfortunately, that may have happened in Australia as well, as allegedly happened to this Jewish man wearing a keffiyeh who was allegedly assaulted or at least involved in a scuffle, depending on who's telling the story, at a protest against a panel discussion which advertised the highly controversial Israeli politician Ayelet Shaked. It turns out she wasn't there, because her visa was denied on the grounds of genocidal statements which she is alleged to have made or endorsed. Now, whatever you think of the merits of those allegations, or whatever you think of Ayelet Shaked herself, that's why the protesters were there. They said so themselves. Well before the protest, an organization called Free Palestine Coalition NARM, or FPCN, wrote, "Genocidal planning is not welcome on sacred Unwurrung land. We will peacefully demonstrate across the road." This is a protest called by Jewish anti-Zionists, many of whom grew up going to synagogue, and do not acquiesce to our religion being weaponized as a tool of imperialist genocide. But you wouldn't know it from the Discourse in Melbourne.
And confront people in their place of
worship.
Victorian Premier Jacinta Allen had condemned the planned protest, saying people have a right to practice their religion in peace.
Remember, this video was titled 2 Synagogues in a Park. We've already talked about the first synagogue in the park, at Prince's Park in Caulfield. This is the second synagogue, more than 3 kilometers away as the crow flies, but 30 minutes in Melbourne traffic. Unlike the first protest, this actually took place at a synagogue, even though, just like the protest outside Sydney's Great Synagogue over the Technion, which we discussed in another video, it had nothing to do with religious observation.
Daniel Rabin says while he supports the right of protesters to voice their opinions, this wasn't the place to do it.
If you want to protest, you want to make sure our government hears your view, there's the channels to do it. There's the place to do it. You're coming to somebody's backyard, to their place of worship.
Surely Rabbi Rabin would agree that 572 Inkerman Street is a reasonable place for Australians to protest a political event happening at 572 Inkerman Street, even though the building happens to be a synagogue, especially since the presentation was scheduled for 7:30 p.m. on a Monday night, 3.5 hours after the synagogue was closed. Just as was the case with the protest at the ceremony honoring the Technion, as we discussed in another video, this was not a religious event. It was a political event which happened to be held in a synagogue.
Why you would protest outside a place of worship is utterly beyond me.
It clearly is. As is, it seems, the concept of doing basic preparation before an interview. That's radio presenter and Melbourne personality Tom Elliott, whose thoughtful perspectives on Islam we encountered on our segment on Islamophobia. But whatever his views on politics or these protests, he should make sure that he gets his facts straight, as should the Premier.
People have a right to practice their religion in peace.
We're sorry, but that statement was plainly dishonest. It was slanderous of the protesters, some of whom were Jewish, and also terrifying to Jewish people who weren't there and were being told by the Premier of Victoria, just as by the Premier of New South Wales, that there are angry mobs of people who are
harassing other people or intimidating other people from recognising their religion and worshipping at religious buildings.
Is it any wonder Jewish people are terrified in this country?
You know, we're entitled to our opinions, but don't use this to intimidate regular people going about their regular lives to enjoy their freedom of practice of their worship or their opinions, you know?
I think we can agree on that. We certainly don't support Australians intimidating other Australians for any reason.
A synagogue is a place of worship, reflection, debate and discussion.
That's Daniel Aghion, president of the ECAJ, whose other leaders we've already heard from in this series, and on that we also agree at Neosis.
It is not a place for mindless intimidation.
As a society, we need spaces for contemplation, for reflection, and for discussion of important things. We should all cherish and protect spaces where Australians can do that, just as these Australians here, exercising their right to
worship, reflection, debate and discussion.
We're not Jewish, so are unsure which of the many sublime passages of the Talmud is the subject of this gentleman's theological disquisition. But we have no doubt it's extremely profound, and we stand by this man's right to articulate it.
People have a right to practice their religion in peace.
Agreed. We all agree. So what's the problem, you may be wondering? Apparently, these 8 people, some of whom are Jewish,
did disturb the peace.
You heard that right. These 8 people, these ungovernable, unwashed, seditious street sots, these heinous, howling hooligans,
did disturb the peace.
So let's get this straight. According to the ECAJ, our combined news media, and our Premier, these reflective, prayerful scholars minding their own business had their
worship, reflection, debate and discussion
interrupted by the
mindless intimidation
of these 8 people who are, or at least claim to be, themselves Jewish. But still
did disturb the peace.
Is that what Premier Jacinta Allen mean?
Yes, that's exactly what I mean.
Well, that's curious, Premier, because
organisers of the Snap pro-Palestine protests quickly backflipped, saying they would be cancelled due to claims they were being threatened.
Yes. The only people in this story who have actual claims of threats were the protesters, FPCN, who cancelled the protest due to online threats of violence. Although 8 bloody-minded protesters showed up anyway. The threats allegedly came after the Australian Jewish Association posted this note on Saturday, November 23,
surprise, surprise,
2 days before the planned protest, calling people to come out and confront the protesters. Now, Sky News doesn't mind those threats, calling them
unfounded claims of threats of violence.
What does the word unfounded mean in this case? That the threat shouldn't be taken seriously? That Sky doesn't believe FBCN's claims of receiving them? That they think they made the whole thing up? All we know is that these are the folks who responded to the AJA's tweet, who don't look to us like people engaged in
worship, reflection, debate, and discussion.
We aren't judging these people. We aren't saying they're breaking the law or have no right to be there. It's just that they aren't doing that. So what are they doing? We know that at least one of them got into a scuffle with one of the 8 protesters, a Jewish man who, as we mentioned, was allegedly thrown to the ground. They were both cuffed, but only one was arrested.
Handcuffed and locked into the back of a divvy van.
And later charged with disturbing the peace. The one who wasn't wearing the keffiyeh. So our question is, who exactly was doing the
mindless intimidation?
This is the way the Jerusalem Post described it. The Jewish community chased them out. How does one chase someone out from a public space in their own country except with
mindless intimidation?
Who is doing the intimidating here? The people who report receiving threats of violence and get chased out of a public space? Or the people doing the chasing?
We're entitled to our opinions, but don't use this to intimidate regular people going about their regular lives to enjoy their freedom of practice of their worship or their opinions, you know?
Let's keep it real, okay?
Because whatever side on the political questions at play, if we can't agree on the importance of speaking accurately about the facts, we aren't going to get anywhere in Australia. Rabbi Rabin may or may not care about that, but the Premier is supposed to.
People have a right to practice their religion in peace.
They certainly do. And they also have a right not to be misrepresented, either intentionally or negligently, by their political leaders. Moreover, it really doesn't matter whether the protesters were Jewish or not. Everyone has the right to peaceful protest.
You're coming to somebody's backyard, to their place of worship.
It also doesn't matter whether someone thinks it's their neighborhood. We aren't living in 1970s South Africa or Hebron.
Why can't he be with us?
Because there are limits for Palestinians, so he can't.
Everyone has a right to protest anywhere, whether Jewish, Christian. So long as they act lawfully, it doesn't matter if powerful Australians in business, media, or politics believe they are
noisy and aggressive,
despicable,
cultural Marxists,
pro-Hamas
jihadists,
turning their back on civilization,
poorly integrated migrants,
flirting with ideas of barbarism,
shit Jews.
On the side of the rapists and the torturers and the killers and the kidnappers.
Doesn't matter. The freedoms which protect jihadis are the freedoms which protect all of us. That's what it means to be a liberal democracy. We merely call attention to it because the fact that such language is so easily, so seamlessly applied to people who are themselves Jewish adds interesting color to the assertion, which men like Peter Beinart pretty clearly reject, that all this discourse is really about Jewish safety. We all need to do better. And we all need to insist our leaders in government and in the media also do better.
And that is exactly what happened. On this very spot, on the eve of the Sabbath, right in front of the synagogue, our house of worship.
But to do either of those things, be civil with each other and be truthful with each other, we have to do a better job of talking and listening to each other, of challenging narratives that just don't pass the most basic sniff test.
Local Jewish residents were denied access to their own home.
To resist the temptation to jump to conclusions about each other without making the least effort to make sure they are right. And of course, for people in authority, whether in government or media, making sure that indeed you are speaking to all voices in Australia, lest there might be relevant information you just aren't getting. Senator Dave Sharma represents a state with almost 500,000 Muslims projected from the 2021 census, and that's of course not even considering the fact that plenty of non-Muslims were also at the Burgertory protest, as well as at least a few Jews who were known to members of the community.
People have a legitimate right to political protest. We've seen some of these actions cross the line quite considerably to demonise groups of fellow Australians.
We've got people in our country who are
calling Australia home when they don't have Australia in their hearts.
Threaten them, to intimidate them, to menace them.
Tenfold increase since October the 7th, a tenfold increase in Islamophobic incidents.
We've seen Jewish-owned businesses boycotted and defaced.
It is so crispy. Look how burnt it is.
You don't belong here. We're going to boycott you. We're going to close you down. Your shop's going to go.
We've seen chants of death to the Jews and gas the Jews.
I'm not sure if it's the cooking or the smell of burnt children in Gaza.
That is not acceptable in Australia. It doesn't matter what your feelings are on this conflict, that is absolutely not acceptable.
Anyone who is pro-Palestine is a Nazi and deserves to be attacked.
I wasn't aware that there were any anti-Islamic sentiments expressed in Caulfield.
I will be made a shaheed of, which in translation is you'll be made a martyr of, so someone's threatening to kill me.
As we've said, this Q&A episode was filmed 72 hours after the Burgertory protest. How can it be that nobody at the ABC and nobody in Mr. Sharma's office, or Senator Patterson, who represents Victoria, which means he represents Victorians like Mr. Taye, how can it be that nobody managed to speak to someone who would have known the protesters to at least get a more balanced perspective?
It wasn't an anti-racism vigil.
They apologised.
This is a euphemistic way to describe what was something quite shocking.
You say you want to have a role monitoring the ABC and holding the ABC and other public, another public broadcaster, SBS, to account on, quote, avoiding false or distorted narratives. What false or distorted narratives do you have in mind?
Balance. Remember how important that is?
These are your words. You want those public broadcasters to avoid false or distorted narratives. You must have had something in mind when you wrote those words.
Well, I mean, obviously there have been lots of complaints that have been made where they've only shown one side, let's say, of the debate in the Middle East and not the other side of the debate.
Yes. Whatever. That explains why Senator Sharma so confidently stated,
I wasn't aware that there were any anti-Islamic sentiments expressed in Caulfield.
We all have to do better than that, and to demand that our leaders do better than that. We have no other choice. It doesn't matter how emotive this or that issue may be. Whether we're Jewish or Anglo, Muslim or Greek, we are all Australian, all of us. We either came here as immigrants or are the descendants of the people who did. Surely we haven't forgotten that.
I just want to get some clarity from you, NASA. Do you think it's okay to go and protest in Caulfield?
Surely you haven't forgotten that, Miss Carvelis, whose Greek father, just like my own Greek relatives, would have known what it's like to be a wog in this country, who would have seemed just as alien, whose customs and clothing and religious practices just as strange as do the customs of these Australians here. I've got no idea what Mr. Frydenberg's Hungarian grandmother was like, but I'm guessing, and this is just a guess, that as long as she lived in Australia, she never lost her Hungarian accent, and had she observed this exchange, she might find herself feeling greater affinity with the non-Jewish voice in this exchange than the Jewish one. At the very least, perhaps we might keep that possibility in mind before we demonize these people as racist thugs, before we allow our most ignorant fantasies about them to run rampant in our heads, and before we allow ourselves to amplify and repeat allegations about them that are simply not true. Or at least, to be more precise, unsubstantiated. As unsubstantiated as the allegations leveled against the people of Kishinev, as we discussed in another video. She might even, and here I'm going completely out on a limb, so please forgive me if I get this wrong, but somehow I imagine an immigrant having an instinctive appreciation for the comic irony of a scene like this.
This is my homeland. I was born here.
Is there not irony in the idea of a Jewish woman in an affluent suburb of Melbourne saying to a Palestinian, "This is my homeland, go back to where you came from," when everyone on that street knows full well that the reason he can't do that is because that's her homeland too? Again, where's Larry David when we need him? Don't get us wrong. It's not her fault he's in this situation. It's not his fault either. None of us here in Australia are responsible for the absurdity of this situation. But for God's sakes, we can choose whether or not we allow ourselves to be bound by it, because its limitations and chains are imaginary. That's something he wasn't able to do. He wasn't able to return the hostages. Nobody in Australia can return the hostages, I'm afraid. All we can do in Australia is be civil to each other, while pressing our government to behave in a manner that accords with our collective values as a nation. And of course, most importantly, to tell the truth. Yes, the emotions of that evening ran high, and for many people, educated in private schools and cocooned in leafy suburbs, it may have been the closest they've ever come to a physical altercation. But that's when affirming core values is most important, because social cohesion is easy when the temperature is low.
Get messy with all those feelings flying around.
Why? Does that make you uncomfortable?
No.
No?
No, I'm not on your couch.
Well, you know what Freud said about the Irish.
This is my home. I was born here.
What Freud said about the Irish is we're the only people who are impervious to psychoanalysis.
You respect the hostages then.
Dialogue is what gives us the opportunity to negotiate and renegotiate not just the meaning of words, but also reasonable expectations, boundaries, and norms.
Let's do what Tupac and Biggie never managed.
We need to spend less time casting aspersions on each other and more time talking to each other, being curious about what our motivations are, and most importantly, asking questions.
You got something you want to ask me?
I just want to get some clarity from you, NASA. Do you think it's okay to go and protest in Caulfield?
As we've said at the start of this video, we think it's inevitable that Muslim Australians and Palestinian Australians will come to the same place that every other Australian or American or other ethnic group in a multicultural society has come to.
Do you understand that? This is what America must learn.
We're not getting pushed around anymore.
That we are no longer going to take that.
Just as it has always been in the past.
We're now seeing consequences levied against those who take action and stand against our people.
As we've said before, Jewish Australians aren't the only Australians who aren't willing to be pushed around anymore. So while men like Mr. Rivchin are entitled to advocate for Jewish power and the assertion of it, a far better way to make everyone safe is to create systems that ensures nobody gets pushed around, so nobody feels the need to push back. A system that ensures that everyone gets their voice heard, even if they don't have the Premier's private number on their phone, so nobody feels the need to shout. A system that enables Australians to talk to fellow Australians, so they don't let ignorance turn into mistrust and misunderstanding into resentment. The good news is that such a system exists. It's called democracy. You're welcome. It's our pleasure to share it with you. It's just that right now, it needs some strengthening and support. And we need to start working on that now, because everything we've talked about so far is the easy stuff. Yes, the easy stuff. Because as emotive as the question of Zionism or Intifada or settler colonialism may be, if we can't talk about that, then how on earth are we going to talk about whatever it is we decide to call the thing we did to Gaza?
Senior coalition figures are tonight accusing Penny Wong of dog whistling and creating a climate of fear for Jewish Australians with her provocative language against Israel.
We expect Israel to abide by international law.
That is a new low even for Penny Wong.
Particularly inflammatory in the days after the Jewish community is reeling from the shock of the firebombing of the Adass synagogue.
They don't care about whether it's true or not.
Turn the subject to the accusers, not to the accused.
Simply condones and encourages the sort of anti-Israel sentiment we've seen on the streets, which is becoming very quickly anti-Semitic and anti-Jewish as well.
So the move is always to basically turn attention away from what's actually happening to Palestinians on the ground and turn it into a question about the motivations of the person who is making the criticism.
Teach them how to defend by attacking.
James Patterson and Dave Sharma are tonight urging the Foreign Minister to stop trying to discredit Israel, because this language is only giving license to the Jew haters to continue their mission of intimidation and persecution.
I know that mentality.
You have to know that that's the goal. You have to expose these people. You cannot allow them into a big tent.
It's effectively condoning and encouraging people who are inclined to vilify Israel and consequently vilify the Jewish people.
Because if it serves the cause, it's true.
So it's effectively giving a license or creating a permissive environment for people to go out and continue to say that Israel is guilty of the most monstrous crimes and the Jewish people in Australia should be held accountable for that.
If it serves the cause, even if it's not true, it's true.
Israel is in a war against Hamas, not the Palestinian people. And it's a real tragedy that so many innocent lives have been lost.
Prime Minister Netanyahu is not at war with Yahya Sinwar. He is not at war with Hamas. Israel is at war with the Palestinian people.
When they hide behind the civilians, Minister.
Do you regret being so vocal about not having the protest on the bridge?
No, I don't. I mean, again, it's a tricky one.
It's a mousetrap. You have these famished, starving people. You promise them a little cheese. They're like the showers in Auschwitz. You promise them a little cheese, and then when you get there, the Israeli army shoots them. Gleefully. You know, people don't want to hear that.
Can't help but think, it's nice to know.
Had these thoughts somewhere in the back of the mind and always told themselves, you cannot say that.
You're dancing in a concert while hundreds of thousands of Gazans are, homeless.
It's done with this kind of sadistic glee.
Makes it even better. Yeah. More enjoyable concert.
It would require a novelist.
If only they put the live video footage of Gaza.
The moment it came out of the mouth of the US president, yes, we can do that.
To capture the sadism.
If you weren't Premier, would you have marched?
Look, I mean, that's a fair question. I don't know. I'm not sure.
That's what people don't understand. Look, I know that you guys might be appalled by this, some of the listeners.
The support for these kinds of things, I don't know the exact numbers.
But seriously, this is how Israelis feel. People enjoy knowing that they are suffering.
Silence is complicity.